At the start of the next season, there was a press conference and Ferguson went, "I saw your first editions." Because the first they were the ones that actually got delivered to the Manchester United team hotel in the morning. So they were sort of all waking up with sort of hangovers and just sort of glory, glory. And then they were just sort of reading sort of 90 words of praise, followed by 1,100 words of Teutonic supremacy over the English again.
Hello and welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Today's show is the first of season 2 and it is a deserted island matches special with Henry Winter, chief football writer and author, a journalist, a fascinating chat coming right up. We will preview that in a moment. Just a word though to say thank you so much for finding the show. Thank you for all your support over the summer. Lots of listening back to season 1 and the best bit compilations that we also put out. I have some incredible guests and incredible episodes lined up for you between now and Christmas in season 2. Henry Winter kicks us off today. I've got some wonderful guests. I'm going to reveal all at the end of today's show, so please do hang around for the credits. But let's get to our chat with Henry Winter. This was recorded in a heat wave back in June, 36 hours after Manchester City had lifted the Champions League, of which Henry had been in Istanbul. We chat about that. We chat about all sorts of memorable matches from his career and 1 or 2 games that he wished he'd been at. He speaks really poignantly about some of football's biggest tragedies and how they would be the games that he would get rid of from history. And he's just a very intelligent man, a really warm presence to chat football with, and so much knowledge, as you will pick up in the next 45 minutes or so. So let's get on with it then. This is episode 1 of season 2, Deserted Island Matches with Henry Winter. Enjoy. Joining me today to discuss their desert island match picks and career in football is chief football writer at The Times and author of 50 Years of Hurt, The Story of England Football and Why We Never Stop Believing, Henry Winter. Henry, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Thanks very much. It's certainly the weather to be on a desert island today.
It's very warm, isn't it? First off, you've been in Istanbul this weekend, the Champions League final. How was your experience of that?
Well, Istanbul, I don't know if you've been, but I mean, it's a fantastic city. I mean, the history, the people, the food, the chaos, as long as you're not in a hurry and are prepared to go with the flow and the queues. And I felt for the City fans, talking to some of them on the flight back, UEFA didn't learn from 2005 when it was chaos. And even with the extended metro system, even with loads of cabs, the road system was just chaotic. And there were some fans who took 3 hours to get back into town. Fortunately, they'd won. They were in a good mood. They wanted to get back into Taksim Square and enjoy themselves. But, you know, it was obviously a different dynamic to the final in Paris last year. But UEFA have, they can't keep on having these finals and not be better prepared.
No, absolutely. And it does seem to be a recurring theme. Obviously, that was the last game, I suppose, of the club season. I suppose quick reflections on how good a season it's been. What's your opinion on it?
I'm always really touched when people say, "Oh, it's the end of the season." I think I've got another 3 weeks. And we're going into the international games. When some of the players have sobered up in times, we should get some interesting results. But yeah, absolutely. No, England resumes tomorrow, so we've got Malta away, then North Macedonia at home. I mean, I have to say, I love football, but even I was slightly alarmed to see the pictures on social media of Burnley players returning for pre-season. So it's the sport that never sleeps. It looks a huge summer. The Ashes, the cricket. I'm going to be going to a couple of the tests. But yeah, I'll be sitting there sort of working out which games I'm going to go to next week. So reflections on the season. The quality of the football, I think, has been outstanding, and fair play to Arsenal and Mikel Arteta for pushing that. Saka's been superb. Odegaard, Martinelli. Obviously, the loss. People talk about bottling it, which I just think is so disrespectful to professionals in whatever walk of life. I mean, these young players have not worked so hard and have overcome so many odds to actually get where they are, to have bottling in their personality. So that was disrespectful and naive. I just thought that the Saliba injury was very significant. Also, they were up against one of the greatest teams, probably the 3 greatest teams we've seen in this country. Liverpool 84, United 99, Manchester United 99, and this Manchester City team. So the football's been fantastic. from top to bottom, there wasn't really one team you'd say I'm bored with watching them. People thought the Forest were going to go down, how well they've played, the atmosphere at the City Ground, the quality of their manager. So yeah, I think it's been a good season. It would have been nice if Arsenal had been able to, if Saliba kept fit and they'd be able to maintain it to the end. But look, City are worthy winners.
So before we move into the matches you picked, what are your earliest football memories, and when did you realise that a career in journalism, and I suppose specifically sports writing, was the career choice for you?
I never wanted to be a sports writer. I only wanted to be a football writer. Right. I love other sports. I like going to the cricket. I like going to the rugby. But it's only about football. If I haven't got the job I've got now, I'll be stacking shelves in Harrods or Selfridges or wherever. It's just what I wanted from 14, 15. There was a very famous writer at the Times in that period, some mid to late 70s, and I would read him. And I love football, love playing football, love going to games, like talking about it. And just the thought of being, he wrote this is Geoffrey Green at the Times, he wrote this extraordinary piece, or like 900-word match report on a game when England played in Brazil at Maracanã. And that was early in the 70s. And he basically wrote about his taxi journey from from Rio Airport to Maracanã. And it was just hilarious. And I thought I quite like that travelogue element. I don't like the sort of the over personalizing it. I don't like what we call the opticians, the III approach to journalism. But I do think that if we are privileged in our position to go to these amazing places, just to throw a little bit of local color, as well as the headers and volleys, the glory and the significance of the game. So from a young age, 14, 15, 16, I've got the job now, i.e. football correspondent or chief football writer at the Times, that I've wanted since then. And education was kind of washed over me a bit, although I was fairly privileged with education. And the day after my final exam, I went down to Fleet Street and started hammering on doors until my knuckles bled.
Wow, fantastic. And yeah, here you are. What a fantastic career path. Very few people, I guess, do that, to get to the role and the top of the game of the career they want to be.
I'm not at the top of the game. I look around the press box the other night. I look around sort of my colleagues, my greatest rivals, who are also my greatest friends. There's an element of frustration when they get a good story or do a brilliant intro or a really good feature or interview or whatever column. And you think, wow, I've still got work to do. So absolutely. And, sometimes you feel in this profession that you've got to keep running to stay ahead. But actually, in this profession, you've got to keep running hard and hard just to keep up, particularly with the new wave of talent that's coming in. I look at some of the younger writers, and they're absolutely outstanding. There's a golden generation, without sort of labeling them the Gerrard era, of young football writers coming through. Like 20 years younger than me, and I look at them and I'm in awe of them.
The first match for you to choose is a Premier League game that you were in the stands or the press box. Which match have you gone for and why?
I went for Manchester City 3, QPR 2 in 2012 because of what was riding on it, on the game, in terms of Manchester City's development into this super club, in terms of the tension in the ground as well. And of course, the drama at the end with the Sergio Aguero goal deep into injury time. Just everything about it. And where we sit in the press box at Manchester City, their fans, it's slightly different now because they put they're very kindly, thank you, put the corporate fans in front of us, which means for the first 10 minutes of the second half, we're sort of jumping up and down trying to see over late arrivals. But in 2012, there was some real passionate fans. And there was one lady who was just sitting just in front of me. There's a little alleyway, so gap, and then she was sitting there, and she kept telling her she just couldn't. I think she was probably in her mid-50s. She'd seen the Macclesfield, all those sort of tension, all the eras, the terrible times, Main Road, slipping down to the old third division, all the issues that they've been through, and just the thought of this being so close, would Manchester City do a classic City? If there was a cup for cock-ups, they'd win it every year, as they famously said. And she kept turning around, she kept looking at me. I'm the neutral there, and I'm just sort of almost watching her as much as I'm watching the game. And she was like a conduit into the significance of the game, the emotion involved. And actually, when the final whistle went, the way we work, we write our piece during the game, but then you've got half an hour to do what's called a rewrite. And actually, I wrote it from her perspective for the rewrite, in terms of what it must have meant for her experiencing that. after having had all those years of hurt.
The climax of that game, you're obviously always going to be on those deadlines, and actually a game that turns around, obviously the story has completely changed within 5 minutes. But did that kind of tactic of, if you like, writing it through her perspective help with that rewrite? Because the story, I suppose, that you were preparing yourself to write at 90 minutes and the story that you eventually did write are very, very different versions.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at what we call the runner, I mean, 85% of it would have been written on Manchester City failing. So you have to sort of hedge it slightly. And then, of course, you can stick like 200 words, top and tail, as they call it, for the 90-minute hit. So, yeah, I mean, it's even more different now because you're doing everything immediately live for digital. So, yeah, I think it's good to have that sort of almost like that cathartic element one step removed through a fan looking at them. The bigger the game, the more I write about it from the winning fan's perspective and what it must mean.
Let's move on now to the advent of the Premier League in 1992. The breakaway from the Football League was sudden and unexpected, with top clubs demanding a bigger slice of the pie and their own TV deal to go with it. What do you recall about working through that period, and how clear was it that this was going to be a sea change for English football?
I think really only looking back on it now, probably even looking back on it after 10 years, when you saw the flood, also the Klondike rush of money sort of flooding into the game, and you realise the change, and you look at the sort of relationship between English clubs. We're on the back of a week where 2 of the 3 trophies, the first and the third in Europe, have gone to English clubs, City and West Ham. And that is kind of what they wanted to do in 92, but no one realised that it would have this huge explosion. I think it was desperately needed, because this was 3 years after Hillsborough. The Taylor report, the need for all-seater stadia it was a financial issue for clubs, so they needed to look around, and they looked at the closed shop of television. Was there a cartel, an operation? Could they get more money? They needed the money. So yeah, and it's been it's just an extraordinary success. It's quite interesting when you look at government trade delegations going overseas. There's invariably a Premier League bigwig in tow, because the Premier League now is our most successful export, and everyone wants to be connected to the Premier League. I don't think anyone in 92, those sort of 5 chairmen of clubs, as they sat in that room, could have actually envisaged that it would just become the number one sport in the world, the number one league in the world for any sport.
The growth has been absolutely incredible. The second match for your desert island is a Premier League match you weren't at but wish you had been. What would you go for?
I mean, I've gone for Liverpool 4, Arsenal 4, 2009. Liverpool basically had to win because Manchester United were doing so well at the top. But I've got a soft spot for Arshavin. I don't think anyone's got soft spots for Russians at the moment. But Arshavin, at that time, bizarrely, we'd been asked to have lunch at the Emirates. And it was just after the January transfer window had closed. And suddenly Andrei Arshavin walked through the press room. There were only about 5 or 6 of us there who were working after this lunch upstairs with a couple of board members. And he was hilarious. I mean, he just, if you know him, he's just a genuinely funny guy. Loves football, loves life, just a real character. So I've always had a soft spot for him. So when he played so well, he got 4 goals in that game. I mean, it had sort of significance in terms of the title race, significance obviously for Arsenal, the way they got back into the game, and Arshavin's brilliance. But also just because he's one of the characters. And, coming back to your earlier point about how the Premier League has evolved, you've suddenly got someone like Arshavin coming in. Arsenal got the money to afford him playing although that game was at Anfield, but you look at the Anfield redevelopment, you look at Arsenal's new ground, that's all built on this Premier League money.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrei Arshavin, one of those players who shone brightly for that period he was in the Premier League, and that was definitely, I think, his most iconic performance, scoring 4 goals. So we've touched on it there, actually, in terms of you saying the Premier League as a product. Obviously, it's right up there with the NFL and the NBA. It's bigger than any other football league as well. What are the ingredients, you think, that make it so irresistible for that global market?
Well, first on your point, it's bigger than the NFL. It's bigger than the NBA. It's one of the reasons why Americans are trying to buy into it, because they realise it's the number one sports league in the world. But I do slightly bridle, maybe it's my age, that this football began in 92. The Premier League has been magnificent, but it was going for 100 years. English football, league football, was going for 100 years before that. So, I love Premier League records. I like that concept. Alan Shearer, 260. I get all that. But, we have to look into the grand scheme of things. That football was going pre-92. In terms of your point, why has it been successful? I come back to first the stars like Arshavin, as we talked about, Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Cantona was slightly, it was around that time. The whole drama of it. There's an element with the Premier League that no publicity is bad publicity. So when Cantona jumps into the crowd in 95 at Crystal Palace, it's embarrassing to the sport, but it's actually great for the league because it's just everyone wants to watch it even more. It's like a leading actor sort of punching a cast member sort of on stage. There's a sort of extra drama to it, which just sort of adds to the box office element. So the stars, the coaches, the innovations, the improvement in pitches, which has helped improve the football, the TV work. I mean, it's no surprise when you go to the Olympics or you go to a World Cup, these global events, and you look into the television compound, British engineers, British sound crews, British directors, British whatever, probably British runners as well. They are fabulous because they've been at the cutting edge, whether it's been Sky, BT as well, pushing it on. And it is fantastic. Obviously, I love going to a game. I prefer going to a game, but if I'm watching a game at home, you just look at the coverage and it's off the scale, whether it's the quality of the punditry, the presentation, but particularly the sort of also the camera work and everything around that. But for me, this was highlighted during COVID, it comes back to the supporters, the backdrop. You can have this beautiful product, but if there isn't 30, 40, 50,000 more people within the ground to bounce off, to provide that backdrop, then it just loses so much, as we saw during COVID. I still find it ridiculous that fans still charge in many clubs so much to go into grounds, when actually those tickets should be even more subsidized by this, 10 billion quid's worth of television money. Because if I talk to foreign journalists, or if I'm just talking to people overseas, they go, oh, the atmosphere looks amazing at the City Ground or Anfield on a night match, or Old Trafford, now Ten Hag got them going again. St James's Park with all the flags and just the passion of the joy. That is so important. And that has been fans coming back, fans feeling safer in grounds. Obviously, there's less physical violence and it's more verbal violence. And we also see it on social media, disgracefully. But the fans have been absolute key. And when I go in and talk to fans groups, I say, why aren't you a little bit more militant like the German fans? Why aren't you work more as a collective? But football is so tribal. They almost want to work club by club, terrace by terrace. Whereas if they worked as a group, I think they could definitely get ticket prices down. So absolutely, fans have been key.
To have more subsidised ticketing, definitely, I think, is one area the Premier League could massively improve. The third game you're going to get on VHS for your desert island is a top flight game from before the Premier League era. What would you choose?
May 86, The Bridge, Kenny Dalglish's volley, which effectively took them to the title, and Liverpool en route to the double. I mean, he was player manager. I'm sort of looking back, I'm even fonder of the moment. I was there as a fan, not a Liverpool fan or a Chelsea fan, although growing up in London, I went to a few Chelsea games and other clubs. I've written a couple of books with Dalglish, and just really like him as he's just a remarkable character. Absolutely wicked sense of humour. The wind-ups I've been on the receiving end of. So an extra fondness sort of layered onto the memory of 86, and that goal. And I was in the shed, and Stamford Bridge. I mean, you talk about how footballers come on. You look at Stamford Bridge now. I know they're thinking of moving or redeveloping, but Stamford Bridge in '86 was just embarrassing as a ground. So looking back on that goal, but you know what? So much of it comes down to the quality of the individual players, the technique. The timeless technique of Dalglish catching that ball on the volley and beating the keeper, and just the emotions that get stirred by that for all the Liverpool fans there. That was a special moment. That was a big goal for me. That everyone talks about how important was that goal, or is it a great goal? I think you can only have a great goal if there's great significance attached to it. So like John Barnes' dribble through the Brazilian defence of whatever it was, 84. That is a magnificent goal. But I think even John would tell you he scored far more significant goals, which would then be greater goals. That Dalglish goal worked on two levels. It was a great technical goal, and it was also a great goal in terms of its significance.
We've talked about your career. That must be a real moment when you are face to face on a professional level with, I guess, someone that you've watched from the stands had been a hero for you. Does that still happen? Is also like that pinch yourself moment?
I don't do heroes. First, because I think the word hero should be applied to medics who kept us going during COVID, to people who run into war zones and go back and help. Just those are proper heroes. I would call Kasper Schmeichel a hero, the way that he ran towards a burning helicopter when Vichai, the Leicester City chairman, so sadly passed away. So that's hero. I don't really do. I think it's probably the background that I grew up in. My father was quite well known. My mother was very successful in her work. My brother is far better known than I am. My sister's brilliant at what she does. So I've never really grown up in that world that you idolize people. Absolutely immense respect for someone like Dalglish. Obviously, as a footballer, watching him, respecting him, admiring him, and then seeing how he kept a community together during Hillsborough with the huge personal cost to himself. Ultimately, he would never sort of accept this because he always talks about the families. But Hillsborough had a toll on him as well in terms of how he then had to go and leave the club because of the strain, and also just huge admiration for him as a family man and as just one of the funniest men you could ever meet. So yeah, I mean, it's a mix of it. But in terms of, I don't really have heroes. I don't think I've ever been. This might sound a little bit arrogant, but I don't think I've ever been awestruck in someone's company. But having said, I've never met Messi, but I've met pretty. I've interviewed Pele a couple of times, but no, I think what it is, it's just a feeling of huge privilege to be able to talk to people and to try and understand how they've got to this peak level. And I think you find, and I'm sure you find this, so people who've got to the very top of their professions in life, say like a Pele, are just some of the most down-to-earth, graceful people you can meet. So Bobby Charlton is just one of the most humble, inspiring men you can meet, and yet, won the Ballon d'Or, won the European Cup, won the World Cup. Bobby Moore was exactly the same as well. Lifted the World Cup, one of the most humble, generous, graceful people that you can meet. I think I walk around with respect in my head, but I don't think I really idolize.
So as we record this, talk of a European Super League continues to rumble on after the disastrous false start of 2021. Meanwhile, UEFA continues to shuffle its pack of European competitions and formats, while the continent's super clubs, all short on cash and jealous of the Premier League's riches, flex their muscles. Is this football's inevitable next step, do you think, or can the relationship between domestic football and European football as we know it be preserved and reformed both here and abroad?
I think we've got quite a decent balance at the moment in terms of the money that's flowing into the elite clubs, yet we cannot destroy the pyramid. I mean, that was one of the great things of the European Super League, is that everyone, it's very rare for people to be so united in the sport, and particularly the fans of Liverpool and Arsenal and clubs like that who had Super League plotters at the top of their clubs. They were fantastic, and they united sort of with everyone. I mean, take Manchester City. You look at probably the best player on the pitch in the Champions League final. I know everyone talked about Ederson and Rodri, but for me, it was John Stones. Where did John Stones grow up? Grew up in a village outside Barnsley. Went to Barnsley's academy, age 8, down in the EFL. Good coaches there, nurtured him. Good people around him, nurtured him. Look at him now, champions of Europe. We have to have a ladder. We have to have a pyramid for young coaches, for young players to make their step up. I think of the 26 players who went to the World Cup, 22, 23, part of their career, either at the start or on loan or in EFL competitions, to the EFL. So it was ridiculously naive of the European Super League clubs. It was a PR disaster. It was driven by people in America who had no clue about what the reaction would be. I mean, sometimes I feel in this world that when I eventually sort of retire or get sacked, I'm going to sit in a bar and I know the one. There's a nice pub because I used to go there as a schoolboy. Don't tell my teachers. In Whitehall, in Westminster, I'm going to sit in a little corner there, and I'm going to say, right, I'm going to give you very simple advice. And this may sound arrogant, but I'm very fortunate. What I do is that I go and talk to people with common sense all over the country. I go to matches at Middlesbrough. I go to matches at Bristol City. I go and you talk to players as well. Players, so much common sense. Talk to Marcus Rashford, so much common sense. When the whole Rashford food poverty, free school meals thing was going on, I was talking to people in Whitehall who were utterly clueless about Marcus Rashford, how he was going to win this debate. So yeah, so that's just a little sort of side thing I'm going to do when I retire. It's the appliance of common sense, and it applies with the European Super Leaguers. We were all laughing in the press box. Obviously, immediately we bristled, we slaughtered them, tried in our small way to see if we could see it off. Brilliant, the fans galvanised it. Boris Johnson, bit of an idiot, we know that, but actually one of the decent things he did was threaten the legislative time bomb. He probably did it for political reasons because he knew that it would help him in areas of the country which weren't particularly Tory. But absolutely, the government galvanised. But I could have sat down with the Super League plotters and saved them humiliation and some fines. So, but yeah, there will be an element of coming again. I think the way they will do it is it will be a streaming platform, and say an Apple will come in and the individual clubs will stream with them, because this is all about individual clubs getting the most money, particularly with the Americans coming in. So once each club can stream and do those deals individually, then I think they will be so enriched by money that they won't necessarily worry about the Super League.
The fourth game is a European club tie that you'd want to take with you. What would you go for?
Well, I haven't just come back from Istanbul. I thought about 2005 and that remarkable Gerrard game, but I've gone for 99 because with Manchester United against Bayern Munich, I mean, it was just a nightmare that night. I mean, I wasn't at the Times at the time, but the Times' computers crashed that night, so they didn't get their first edition out, and that first edition was a car crash anyway, because my match report was 1,100 words of vilifying Ferguson's tactics, and then 90 words on the top saying in a dramatic late turnaround, Sheringham and Solskjaer scored. And it was very funny because at the start of the next season, I mean, so everyone did that for their first edition. So at the start of the next season, there was a press conference and Ferguson went, "I saw your first editions." Because the first editions were the ones, because British newspapers were printed in Spain at the time. They were the ones that actually got delivered to the Manchester United team hotel in the morning. So they were sort of all waking up with sort of hangovers and just sort of glory. And then they were just sort of reading sort of 90 words of praise, followed by 1,100 words of Teutonic supremacy over the English again. So look, amazing night. The individuals involved, Clive Tilsley's commentary, which I obviously listened to coming back. I mean, there are individuals in that team who I've got huge respect for. And particularly someone like Peter Schmeichel, his last game for them doing the treble. What a way to bow out. And he saw cartwheel at the end, and it was just, look, it was a privilege to be there. I'll tell you what, if you're going to do a trophy in one of the great cities of the world, Barcelona. I mean, not that we like, well, we do like a night out as journalists, but that was a brilliant night.
Obviously, you're in professional mode because you've got copy to deliver. You are engulfed in what is happening from a professional perspective, but you are witnessing, obviously, one of the moments, I guess, a great privilege of your role. You're witnessing one of the great moments that will live forever in football. How much of you is able to kind of enjoy that, and how much of you is kind of razor sharp focused on the job in hand?
I've enjoyed the last 35 years. I mean, I take your point about there's a mechanics of delivering your copy, and with Wi-Fi, it's so much easier with computer now. I mean, when I started out, I was literally running out of Ewood Park and knocking on someone's front door saying, "Can I use your phone to call a copy taker?" And I hope she sort of hears all my words correctly, or he or she. So yeah, with Wi-Fi now, I mean, it's fun. You know, I mean, journalism's always been called the first draft of history. I'm not sure we are anymore. I think social media is, because everyone's in the ground, they're streaming, they're reacting. So even if we're the second draft of history and we're supplying it for digital and newspapers, and also I do a lot of stuff on social media, it's not a job. I mean, I've got friends who are like RAF pilots, and the situations they've been in, you know, I mean, that is life and death. You know, all I have to do is hit a deadline, and you can do that and enjoy it. but also it is professional, but it's also got to be personal as well. I don't know anyone in the press box. I mean, they're probably what about, I don't know, there are probably thousands of football journalists in this country, but of the sort of the 100 who are on the road all the time and sort of bouncing off each other and seeing each other, I'm talking about the written media. Everyone's a football fan. You've got to be in this. You don't do it for the money. You don't do it if you want any sort of private life. My son, I always remember his birthday because it was Rob Lee's debut against Mexico at Wembley, and because I ran out of the maternity suite to get to Wembley to cover England. So there's always that element, but it's a vocation, it's a passion, it's an obsession with, I would say, everyone in the press box.
In 2016, your book, 50 Years of Hurt, was published. It begins with a conversation with the late, great Jack Charlton and his recollections of 66. It ends with the humiliation for England against Iceland at the Euros in France half a century later. And in between, you speak some of the key characters of each era of the national side, from the near misses to the nowhere nears. Since publishing, the Gareth Southgate era has seen the national side come closer than ever before to ending those years of hurt, but we are closer to 60 years now. How confident are you that England will end that one day? And what did those conversations reveal as to why it hasn't happened yet?
Your first question, I'm confident it will end one day, not simply because I'm optimistic, but I just look at the level of quality of the England squad at the moment, and not just the starting 11, but the players coming through. So, I mean, Phil Foden doesn't start for England, but he's an absolutely immense talent. I think he's got 5 titles and a Champions League. So you look at his talent England have got in England have got, it's just remarkable. So, you know, the talent is there. It's just a question of Southgate making those key decisions in the second half, particularly in the crunch games, to get England over the line. But certainly the playing talent's there.
The 5th game to take with you is an England game you'd relive forever from any era. What have you gone for?
66. How else? What else could I choose? I mean, 66 was just incredible. I mean, I was 3 at the time, so I have absolutely no recollection whatsoever, but I watched it so many times again. Alan Ball's performance in the second half at such a young age, 21, 22, just everything about it. The day, I mean, you talk to people and you read reminiscences, and there must have been about 400,000 people there. Everyone claimed that they were there. So, yeah, just the greatest moment. And then Bobby Moore's, I just love that about him. Just the little thing of wiping the sweat and dirt off his hand because he saw the sort of the Queen's gleaming white gloves. So absolutely everything about it was special. Except apart from the fact they only got £1,000 each. Can you imagine that now? Can you imagine if the FA told the England players, look, England players don't play for England for money. They give their money to a charity, which is and rightly so, because it's an honour. But £1,000, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and obviously so many of those players, you know, the riches of today's game were a long way away for so many of those players who went on to just then have ordinary careers, as was the way back then. So in your blueprint for change within the book, you make 5 detailed suggestions on how England can become successful. Some have actually happened in the intervening period: a more relaxed dressing room, informal media gatherings, which Southgate has been widely praised for. Some of your suggestions for the Premier League and domestic calendar have also come into fruition, such as reducing the number of FA Cup replays, a staggered winter break that will return in January 2024. And some suggestions still seem a way off: an 18-team division, levies on academies, signing overseas players, closer collaboration between the league and the national team around fixture congestion. Is there an argument to suggest that the commercial monster of the Premier League is actually beginning to hurt the national side now?
It was interesting when the Premier League started out, it was known as the FA Premier League, whereas now the FA bit's been dropped and the Premier League basically just runs English football because it's got the power. You know, the FA is in charge of discipline. It's got a couple of properties, Wembley and St George's Park. It's got the England national team, but the game is run by the clubs. And the game's almost at times run from the Everglades and Denver and Boston and places like that. So that is absolutely a concern. That's why we need this regulator, which is coming in, I think, next year, which will be really important, just to sort of keep an eye on the owners. People don't mind if they come in for money, but as long as they respect traditions, respect the clubs, don't try to change things too much, then things will be fine. But, you know, you look at, say, you look at the quality of coaching that the England players are getting at their clubs. With respect to Southgate, the coaching that the Liverpool players like Trent Alexander-Arnold, Jordan Henderson are getting under Klopp, that the Manchester City English contingent like Stones, Grealish, Foden, Walker, Calvin Phillips are getting under Pep Guardiola, that the English contingent at Arsenal, particularly Bukayo Saka, is getting under Mikel Arteta. Ten Hag's made Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka better players. They are the clubs are playing their part in the academies, in the coaching to help the England team. I would like to see a bit more of more homegrown players on the bench, but they've expanded the bench, I guess, so that's helped in a way. But yeah, look, Southgate can't complain about the quality of players he's got to work with who are coming through the English academies at the Premier League level.
The sixth match to take with you is an international match from any era that doesn't feature England. What would you choose?
The greatest game of all time, probably 1970. Brazil 4, Italy 1. Pele's header, Boninsegna. I mean, he's equaliser. People forget it was a really good Italian team. And then I've written them down: Gerson's shot, Jorginho, and then of course the fourth one. I mean, it wasn't so much icing on the cake, but just like sort of layer upon layer of just rich joy of icing on the cake. The 7 outfield players who involved: Tastar, Brito, Clodoaldo. People who forget, in that era, and you look back. I mean, I was only 7 at the time, but you look back at a player like him, the skill he had beating 4 good Italian players. And then Rivellina, Jorginho. I mean, just the names are just beautiful on their own. And then Pele's he knew, because Tostao had been shouting to him. He said, Carlos Alberto is coming up like a steam train from right back. But Pele had like peripheral vision. He knew, and just the layoff was perfect. And Carlos Alberto just appears. He's just cinematic, visually, can't use the word, visually, it's just such a stunning goal. Enter, it's like Shakespearean, sort of enter stage right. Carlos Alberto pursued by a bear and just sort of drilling that ball in. So one of the great games. And also frustratingly, probably earlier in the tournament, one of the best England squads. You could argue that it was even better than 66 when you look at how Muller had developed and players like that. But yeah, what a great tournament. I would love to have covered, I've done 9 World Cups now. I would love to have covered 70 if I had that. When I'm sitting on the desert island kicking a coconut about trying to be Pele, I will go through all the World Cups I've missed. 58 would have been special just to watch Pele. 66, obviously. But 70, definitely.
You've reported back from every World Cup since 1994. Of the World Cups you have been to, which has been your favourite and why?
Everyone's different because I'm really nosy, I'm really curious, and I like going to places. And what I do in the morning is I go for a run, and I just run. Because if you go for, say, like Russia, we were going to places in Russia where if you walk through, people looked at you suspiciously. But if they see an overweight, puffing, middle-aged, obviously tourist jogger going through, they just sort of smile and think, what an idiot. So I run everywhere. I love getting lost. I think getting lost is one of the joys. I love taxi journeys that just go mad. I would go with Brazil 2014. I mean, it was just special, just the sort of the obsession with football everywhere. Obviously, England weren't very good, but everything about Japan 2002 was just amazing. Just the sort of the unique culture, the travel, the ability to go. I mean, I like exploring, so I was getting up at 6 o'clock every morning in Kobe and getting the early morning Shinkansen to Kyoto and going around the temples and shrines. And then I realized we were only going to be there for 5 weeks, and there are 2,000 temples and shrines to go through. So yeah, I mean, it's just that ability to sort of meet people. We have a press team. When they allow me to play, I mean, it's a great opportunity to play against local press, just again to see the world. So it's look, it's about the football. 95% is about the football, but it's also about experiencing the country, the culture, the people. I try to learn a little bit of the language before I go, so I can learn a bit of Arabic before I go to Qatar, just so that you can just break the ice with people, even if it's then all sort of weird hand movements after that.
And so you now have the opportunity to choose a current or former Premier League player to attempt a rescue mission from the island. There is a caveat, though. If the rescue mission fails, you will have to see out your days on the island with this player. With all of that in mind, who would you go for?
I mean, I'd definitely go Jack Grealish because he's such a character. He's just great fun. It would be a good kickabout with the coconuts, although you wouldn't be able to get the coconut off him. But he's just such one of life's positives individuals. We could sort of swap stories about Aston Villa and Manchester City and England from different perspectives. But he's just one of life's characters. I've been lucky to interview him a few times down the years, and he's just great fun. So how practical he would be, I don't know. But I tell you what, even if it was a deserted island, I would back Jack to find a nice beach bar somewhere, which you can sit in the evening.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the modern era's characters, which is always good to see. It's a great pleasure for me to interview you today as we come towards the end. Which interviews do you remember with the most fondness? I mean, you've mentioned one or two of them, Pele and Bobby Charlton. Who do you kind of reflect back on the island and kind of think it was a real pleasure to sit down with that person?
I mean, I've been privileged to interview a few. I mean, it's not simply a pleasure, but it's actually a privilege. A lot of the interviews I do, and particularly in the last few weeks, Jordan Henderson, Eric Ten Hag. But I'm going to choose Jenny Hicks, who lost her two daughters at Hillsborough. And I went to see her and talked. And it's one of those ones I didn't really ask questions because she sort of talked so powerfully and about her love for her daughters. And it's every parent's nightmare, something happening to their children. It was one of those interviews that you just knew you had to get right, out of respect for her, out of respect for the 97, and also out of respect for the ongoing campaign from the Hillsborough families to make government, the authorities, the police, and the media more accountable. So that was an interview that I didn't have sleepless nights over, but just I knew I've got to get this right. Every word had to be right. I just didn't want to let her down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What a fantastic choice. I'm now also going to give you the chance to delete a game from the history books by taking it to the desert island with you. Which game would you banish to Room 101 forever and why?
I mean, it's the word delete is difficult. I mean, what I would say is these are the moments that I wished had never happened. Hillsborough, Burnden Park, Ibrox, Heysel, Bradford, a couple of tragedies at stadiums in South Africa, around the world. So all of those, because football is about a celebration, going to a match with friends, with family, to celebrate football, to celebrate each other's company, to have a good time. And then when just darkness descends, if those had never happened, wow, I mean, that would have just been ideal. But through various reasons, whether it was human error, whether it was the authorities' arrogance, blindness, lack of care, lack of compassion, unfortunately, the history of the game has been studied, scarred by these stadium disasters.
So as we near the end of our chat, Henry, you have a career in the football industry that began in 1986. During that time, there's been huge change, as we've already mentioned. What changes have been really beneficial in that time, and what are the ones that maybe you wish you could rewind the clock on?
Yeah, well, rewinding the clock, that's pretty appropriate with time wasting in the modern game. I would, the first one, I think the end of the back pass rule. I think that's really encouraged it, and we're seeing it more and more now with football. Otherwise, because goalkeepers just kicking it up and booting it long. I think that was good. I totally understood, and I still believe in technology and VAR. I just don't think we're using it properly. So I was in Paris in, I think it was 2009, when the Irish were trying to qualify, and there was a Thierry Henry handball, and the Irish were just basically cheated out of the chance of a place. But yeah, VAR is needed, but I think it should be for clear and obvious. It should be used sparingly. It should be used maybe twice a game. Whereas at the moment now, you're going to games and players are trying to celebrate, fans are trying to celebrate, and you're immediately looking at the linesman, at the referee, looking for the sort of, the purple figure to come up. And that's always a concern. So yeah, I just think they need to use VAR better.
And finally, we're going to give you a football to take with you to your desert island and task you with recreating an iconic Premier League goal to see out your days. You've potentially got Jack Grealish there to set you up. Which Premier League goal would you relive forever?
Well, there is a claret and blue element to the goal that I would choose, and it would be March 26, 2000, Paolo Di Canio's volley And if you just rewind, it's very poignant actually, because if you rewind the build-up, Mark Vivian Foe, God rest his soul, wins the ball, and what a player and character, and how he was, and how much he's missed. And then he passes to Trevor Sinclair, who just drills this ball towards the far post. And Di Canio is there, and he's waiting, and he's got the technique, and he looks like he's about to take a touch. And then he just sees that Sullivan is slightly off his line, and he just catches it. He just rises off the ground. He almost floats there, and he just catches it on the volley, right foot volley from left to right across Sullivan and in. And it's just, and his celebration is great as well, because he runs away and he doesn't go mad. He doesn't go full Tardelli. He just runs away, just sort of waving his finger as if this is what I do, So I would look. There'd be many thousands of brilliant goals, but that one for me was just beautiful.
Yeah, a great pick. Henry Winter, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for giving up your time. And is there anything in particular in the pipeline for you? Obviously, people can find you brilliant writing in the Times and online.
No, I mean, unfortunately, the season will end at some point, and I will get a couple of hours sleep and then roll on the Community Shield.
Fantastic. I'm sure it'll be here before you know it. Thank you very much for your time, Henry. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. My pleasure.
So that was Henry Winter. What a lovely guy. What an interesting man. I am convinced that Gareth Southgate would have read his book on England and the manifesto for change, because certain elements of it have definitely been introduced. And it's just looking back from when that book was published in 2016, it's common sense stuff that I'm sure has helped the England team. Really, someone ought to take him up on that offer to share in the wisdom that he's picked up during his football career when eventually he does hang up his press pass. But let's hope that's not for some years to come. Henry Winter, what a guy. What a really enjoyable episode. A huge thanks to Henry for giving up his time to chat to me. So as I promised at the beginning of the show, this is just the first of some amazing guests I've got lined up for season 2. Next week's show is a chat with Neil Cox, former Aston Villa, Middlesbrough, Bolton and Watford defender. We chat all about his career. We chat about the transfer fee that involved some seats for a stand that he was involved in. We also talk about his bust-up with Fabrizio Ravanelli before the 97 Cup final and how that ended his chances of being in the matchday squad. I've also got Mark Draper, who chats all about his Premier League career as well. That's a really interesting chat coming up in a few weeks' time. Raoul Coley, the Newcastle United fan and comedian, tells me all about why Newcastle United are so important to him. The all-time Premier League table count-up continues with in-depth looks at the Premier League spells of Bradford City, Cardiff City and Oldham Athletic. And then, at the moment, planned as a bit of a Christmas 2-part special, my chat with Clive Tildesley, ITV's voice of football for so many years, the voice of FIFA, the voice of the Champions League, World Cup finals. I recorded that earlier this week. We were on for 2 hours. It was so enjoyable. It's going to have to go out as 2 episodes because there's just so much good stuff. What amazing company Clive Tildesley was. And I'm going to end this series end of November, early December with a 2-part special with Clive Tildesley. So much in the pipeline. I hope you'll stick around for it. As always, please support the show by leaving us a review, by subscribing, by sharing it in your football WhatsApp groups, in your social media channels. I really, really appreciate it. Help spread the word. Let's get even more people joining. The numbers keep going up and up every week, and I really appreciate it. And it's thanks to you for sharing the show. So thank you so much indeed for that. And there's a new way that you can support the show. You can buy me a beer via Buy Me a Coffee. Basically, it's just the option to leave a small voluntary donation if you enjoy the show, just to help towards the running costs. It does take a lot of time and expense to actually put the show together. It will always be free, so I will always release these for free. But if you want to buy me a coffee/beer, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/when football began again. And I think it's like £3 to kind of make a donation towards that. I will probably spend it on beer. Thank you if that's something that's up your street. But for now, that is all for this week's show. And it's the beginning of a season that I'm really, really excited about sharing with you. All those episodes, there's a review of 96-97 coming up. Mark Draper, Neil Cox, Raoul Coley, Clive Tildesley, and many, many more. So please do hang around. I'll see you back here next week for Neil Cox. See you then.